Hello, everybody. Welcome to Reddit Roast number 60. Mal, good to see you again. Who have we got today?
Hi, Sam. Today we've got a fintech consultant who does jujitsu, and we'll talk about whether that's of any value in MBA applications. We've also got a tech founder who's in the 30 under 30 list and is worried that her experience is informal compared to the corporate type of applicants. We'll talk about which one's better. We've also got an applicant who's a clear-cut HSW candidate, so you can see what it takes to get into those schools. We've got a consultant looking to pivot from Big Four to MBB, which is a classic career move. We'll talk about how to make that leap. We've also got a candidate who has a recommender who's an M7 MBA alum, and we'll talk about whether that'll help his application. And a bonus at the end, we'll wade into a Reddit debate about whether it's worth taking on debt to attend a higher ranked school. Should we dive into our first profile then?
Let's get cracking. First profile.
All right. First profile. Hey everyone, looking for realistic assessment for my target schools LBS, INSEAD, Columbia, Booth, and Yale. Profile demographic is 26, male, Indian citizen, raised in Dubai, based in London since 22. GMAT focus 675. Undergrad was in economics at a UK target university. GPA not mentioned, but I see there's a 2-1 upper second class honors in there. Work experience, currently a senior implementation consultant for a global fintech firm. I will have 4 years at the time of application, 5 by when I joined the MBA. Certifications, currently sitting the FRM Part 1, plans to clear the FRM Part 2 in November. Extracurriculars, active cricket player for competitive London club, currently the leading run scorer, part-time poker, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Should have the blue belt by the end of the year. Post-MBA goals, OP wants to transition into a highly research-oriented industrial role. Some clarifying as well, not academic research, but industry investment roles that require deep immersion to analyze sectors, trends, and behaviors. What do you think, Sam?
Whoa, lots to get our teeth into here. Okay, let's first talk about academics. Right. A 2-1 is equivalent to a roughly 3.5 to 3.7 in the United States on a 4.0 scale. So that is a solid, nothing too crazy, but a solid GPA, solid grade. And a 675, about the same, to be honest. It's solid, maybe a smidgen below M7. I think we talk about a 685 average for M7. So it's kind of a slightly little bit below, but generally academics, solid. Nothing special, but solid. The economics at a non-target degree, which is non-target school, sorry, the economics at a target university, which is here, there, that's mentioned. That will help a little bit. Certainly the brand of the university will help OP's application. That's cool. So basically academics, average, like just bang on M7 average. Nothing crazy special, nothing too bad, solid. Right. So professional then. This is where things get interesting here. So this implementation consulting role, senior implementation consultant, this is a very common pre-MBA role. It's sitting in the way, kind of the way it's read or the way it's perceived, it's sitting somewhere in between management consultant, which is sort of the client-facing side, and a software engineer, which is the techie side. And an implementation consultant would be seen somewhere in between. On you to make that sound interesting, OP, because implementation consultants often struggle to make their role sound, sexy and kind of impactful. Can be done, but to be clear, that's going to be on you. So demographic, pretty ORM, right? Indian, male, slight benefit, slight advantage of being in having international experience, right? Raised in Dubai, been in London, but be under no illusions. This is an extremely competitive demographic. This is like Indian ambition with Dubai money to pay for tutors. This is an extremely competitive demographic to be up against. So 5 years of work experience at matriculation is also nice. That's bang on the average of these schools. So we really, really like that. Really good, like point in your career, OP, to be doing MBA applications. So that's really nice. Now, extracurriculars. a bit of a like mix here, right? We talked earlier about this Brazilian jiu-jitsu idea and how to kind of whether this can come up in applications. I did MMA and Brazilian jiu-jitsu and Thai boxing, and I meet a lot of candidates who've done it, who do it, or who've done it, and honestly, I've never seen it work well in an MBA application. It's useful, I guess, from like a confidence perspective and whatever, but it's a solo sport. Talking about beating people up is not going to get you into business school. So I've never seen it play a meaningful part, but I do see this cricket as potentially being interesting from like a leadership perspective. Maybe if OP can demonstrate teamwork and maybe organizing like a tournament or something could be interesting there from an extracurriculars perspective. Now, the poker, this sometimes comes up for finance applicants who are talking about who use poker as sort of an interest or a signpost for trading roles. That might be part of OP's narrative. So maybe the poker kind of fits in from a professional perspective. So kind of mixed ECs, like could be useful if framed the right way, but nothing stand out there. Next, these goals, right? I want to talk about this here. So the move, what OP is talking about doing right now, if I understand this correctly, is moving from a global fintech, let's call it Bloomberg, for example. Bloomberg is a tech platform used by traders and investors around the world. It's very, very expensive. It's very, very highly well regarded. The professional move traditionally was you work in investment banking for a few years, and then you go to Bloomberg when either you get fired from your investment banking job or you burn out and you want to do something that is less intense. So the inverse, going from Bloomberg into the investment banking role, look, it happens, but it is a big step up and will definitely require an MBA. I don't love the investment banking goal. If that's the investment role here, if that's if OP is talking maybe about buy side, you could kind of roll sell side investment banking into that, because ultimately sell side investment banking are the predominant users of the Bloomberg terminal. OP probably has relationships there. I've got a better idea for goals, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, I think, when we get on to the what could be done to improve this profile. Overall, then, how do I see this profile? It's very middle of the road. It's very middle of the road. The foundation is solid from an academic perspective, from a professional perspective. Everything's there. You're just going up against a hell of a lot of people with the same thing. So it's going to be about standing out in the application. And we can talk about how to do that.
Okay. And what do you think OP's chances are then? OP is thinking round 1 or round 2? What do you think the chances are?
Yeah, look, I think he's done a very good job of choosing schools. The LBS, INSEAD, Columbia, Booth, I think he's targeting the right level of school. The LBS and INSEAD kind of choice, they will value the international experience. That's like for Indian applicants, that's the key for INSEAD especially. The key difference between the admit and not is the ones that have international experience tend to have much more success with LBS and INSEAD. INSEAD maybe a little bit less if there's no languages. I don't know. There's no mention of languages here. And if OP has lived in Dubai and London, there probably aren't any other languages, certainly aren't any other European languages in the mix here. And that's a requirement for INSEAD. So I'm wondering whether within the European schools, I think LBS is probably slightly more natural fit than INSEAD, but generally the right tier. Then the USM7, look, I think worth a shot. Talking about these sort of Columbia and Booth schools here, worth a shot. But I do think they're going to bundle OP in with the other Indian expat candidates, which, as I said before, is an extremely competitive demographic to be part of. And they often have very, very high scores, particularly the GMAT score. And I'm not sure that the 6M5 is going to stand out against them. So by all means, throw an M7 application in the mix. But for me, I think where OP should be aiming is LBS, T10, and then bottom of the M7 as like a reach, I think is where OP should really be focused. Look, throw Columbia in the mix, throw higher ranked schools in the mix, Wharton maybe as well. But where OP should really be focusing his effort and research, etc., is to me lower end of the M7 and LBS.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what do you think then OP can do to improve their profile for these schools?
Yeah. Okay. So look, I alluded to this a little bit before. I want to talk about the goals.
Mm-hmm.
OP talks here about transitioning into a highly research orientated industry role, not academic research, but industry / investment roles, investment research roles. Now, the obvious kind of the one that sort of stands out, a lot of people would kind of knee jerk into, is equity research. Equity research is basically the people within the investment bank who are studying stocks and analyzing markets in really granular detail. By the way, they tend to be big users of the Bloomberg terminal, for example. So there's a connection there. But I think that OP will find it difficult to stand out up against the investment bankers because a lot of them are already in investment banking. They haven't got quite such a big pivot to make. And as I say, they also tend to have very high stats. Where I think OP should be focusing is this economics and and research themes that are showing up here, right? Be it bachelor's in economics from undergrad, wants to transition into a research role, has quite a lot of experience using the tools used by, or building and implementing the tools used by researchers. To me, the natural fit for a goal for this candidate is economics research companies. The two that jump out, because I've worked with clients from these in the past and fairly recently, is NERA and Analysis Group. And these are like pure play economics research companies that absolutely tick this industry / investment roles that require deep, rapid domain immersion to analyze sectors. That is exactly what the people at Analysis Group, for example, are doing. It's a really, really quite, I mean, it's technical, it's analytical, you could say nerdy, but that seems to be what OP is looking for. So I would say write that down, focus on those as goals: economics research, NERA, which is part of Oliver Wyman, and Analysis Group, which is the two of them are, I think, best in class, more or less, in that kind of economics research sector. That's where OP should be focusing goals. So the question was, what can be done better? 1, goals. 2, extracurricular leadership responsibilities. I mentioned this before. These extracurriculars seem quite solo. Okay, he's a batsman. Fine. But I don't see an obvious kind of team leadership story there. Poker player, the same thing. It's pretty solo. BJJ, even more solo. So I think one of the other things that's going to be important is an extracurricular leadership role. Basically, always easiest to build what you've got. And if you're already an active player in a competitive club in London, take on some leadership responsibilities with that club. Organize a tour to, I don't know, Europe. Organize a fundraising event for a local kids cricket charity. Get some leadership experience within the extracurriculars you're already part of, would be my advice on the extracurricular front. Now, I was working at sort of piecing all of this together into a narrative that might make sense for OP. And I want to give it a shot. Now, I obviously have not got all the information here, so you have to kind of work with me on this. But what I'm thinking, OP, is that you open your story with a narrative, with a story where you are interacting with the users of your tool. For example, let's say it's Bloomberg. You're interacting on a project, on engagement, on implementation with the users of the Bloomberg tool. And they're some quanti research focused organization. And you think in the essay, you think, I was interacting with these researchers and I thought I would love to do their job. And that's your moment of realization. So with that, I want to pivot into a role where I am using tools like the Bloomberg terminal, using my economics degree to research really complex analytical topics. Specifically, my goal is to pivot to Analysis Group, to NERA after the MBA. And by the way, analysis group requires a graduate degree to get into the senior ranks. So you're very, very well positioned as an MBA to apply there. My long-term goal is to, for example, build my own research tool using AI, for example. Right. That's really nice. That works beautifully. However, to reach those goals, I need an MBA. Specifically, right? What do you need about an MBA, right? You need the leadership training, right? Everything I've learned so far about leadership has been self-taught. Okay, so I need formal leadership training. That makes sense. Analytical skills, building tools and researching using analytical methods are not the same. They're both kind of technical and difficult and complex, but they're not the same skill exactly. So the analytical methods, particularly research methods from an MBA, would be very relevant. And by the way, if you can put yourself forward to join some research during the MBA, some academic research that's happening in the school, that would be excellent as a foundation and as a signpost to set you up for a research role afterwards. Good. Negotiation training, right? You're going to be, for example, as an engagement manager within analysis group, you would be negotiating with clients, right? So negotiation classes would be valuable. And I wonder whether if you kind of extrapolate out that long-term goal of building your own startup that's creating an analytical research tool using AI, then you have your network of first customers from the MBA, from the incubator, from that ecosystem that could be valuable. And so that's why you need an MBA to reach those goals. And so you pieced all of that together and you've basically got your career goals essay for Columbia Essay 1.
Okay. That's really nice.
Awesome.
Should we move on to our next profile, Sam? I think.
Yep. Let's do it.
Okay. Profile 2. 21-year-old tech founder. Background Irish, EU citizen, education in the final year of the electronic and computer engineering degree at a top Irish university. GPA upper second class honors, roughly a 3.3 US GPA equivalent. I know this isn't great for M7. GMAT focus has not taken that yet, is testing in January next year. Target is 685 to 705. Experience. OP is a founder, a software consulting company, built and ran a tech consulting firm during my undergrad, scaled to a 6-figure annual turnover. The exit recently successfully negotiated and closed a 6-figure IP purchase agreement. OP also has an internship as a test engineering intern at a Fortune 50 tech company. Some accomplishments there: named to Ireland's National 30 Under 30 list, selected as a Stanford University Innovation Fellow, named Ireland's Innovation Undergrad of the Year, and a public speaker, female entrepreneur. Post-MBA goals: short-term VC associate or chief of staff to tech CEO in London or NYC, long-term return to the founder chair to scale a venture-backed global enterprise. Why MBA? I've proven I can bootstrap a consulting firm and execute a 6-figure IP sale, but I need the M7 ecosystem to master cross-border institutional scaling and transition from a regional founder to a global leader. Target schools reach Stanford and Harvard. Target is Sloan and Wharton. These are all the deferred programs at these schools. I see 3 questions, but first I want to get your take on this.
Yeah, quite a lot going on here. Right.
What was I doing at 21?
Yeah, seriously. I think there was a Medal of Honor video game was big when I was 21. I think I was probably playing that. Right. Let's dive in. So profile academically is we only have the undergrad so far. We don't have the grade GMAT grade yet. I think we said from our previous roast that it's upper 2.1 is equivalent to a little bit higher than a 3.3 GPA. I make that out to be like a 3.5 or 3.6. Either way, certainly not bad. Certainly not bad, and not as bad as OP seems to be thinking based on the questions underneath. So we'll address that clearly. But I would say that's pretty mid from a GPA perspective. Now, everybody's targeting 685 to 705, so I'm not going to put too much emphasis on that. My question is, why testing in January? I guess it's because of OP's exam schedule and uni commitments and things, but get on with it. OP, you're already kind of clearly focused on business school. Just start the studies now. Spread that out if you need to. You can take the test as many times as you need. I wouldn't wait till Jan if I was in OP's shoes. But anyway, it does seem like OP is pretty clever and is not going to have any issue at all with the GMAT focus. So academically, solid slash let's see, but we're in a good spot. Now, professional. Cool. Let's talk about achievements for somebody who's 21 years old. Wow, makes me feel like an absolute slacker. I mean, I love this. Recently built and negotiated the exit for a six-figure exit for a consulting business, a tech consulting business. This is really, really cool stuff. For a deferred MBA candidate, it's really hot. That's a very high level achievement that they will be very, very impressed by. And all the accolades and awards to kind of reflect that, which is awesome. That's nice. Now, one thing from a professional perspective that's not completely clear to me right now is, does OP have a role secured for the next 2 or 3 years for the deferment period? We don't know that, and that will be a big factor. We don't know. So we'll talk about that in a bit more detail, but I'm not sure based on this. Demographic, Irish, definitely underrepresented from an MBA perspective. I had an Irish client last year who got into Wharton, very underrepresented, but a competitive bunch. So really sort of beneficial for OP, definitely. Extracurriculars. I think that for me, the one that stands out is this public speaking in sort of supporting female entrepreneurship, national radio, etc. I think there's something interesting in there. I would say that, look, if your kind of job, if you like, is this entrepreneurship venture, it's a bit difficult to pivot to position the innovation fellow and innovation undergrad as extracurriculars. They sound like they're kind of the same thing as your day job to me. So you need to go a little bit beyond that. And I think this female entrepreneurship angle is really, really interesting. I think the public speaking angle is really, really interesting because I think that's where OP really, really can demonstrate the communication and the leadership and the mentorship skills that business schools are looking for, especially from deferred candidates. So that's really, really nice. Goals, no surprise here. OP has got it all figured out. I particularly prefer the chief of staff angle because, as I've said many, many times on this on these chats, VC is a very nepotistic and difficult industry to enter from a MBA. They don't have, standard. They don't send HRs to business schools to speak because they're not these big organizations. They tend to put 1-2% of the cohort into VC, and that's like the New York schools. It's really, really low. I much prefer the chief of staff role to a tech CEO in London or New York. That totally makes sense as a goal. That's awesome. And then you've already got entrepreneurship, scaling experience. Going back into that after longer term makes perfect sense as well. So OP's goals, nailed it. Overall, a very strong professional profile from a deferred candidate. GMAT pending. Let's see.
Okay. And let me get to OP's questions.
Yeah.
How heavily will a 2.1 or 3.3 GPA, in OP's words, hurt an international engineer at GSP or HPS? Will a 705 GMAT completely neutralize it?
Okay, the two parts to this question. One is I don't quite agree with that conversion. I think OP's been a little bit harsh. The 2.1 is, I think, more like a 3.5 or thereabout 3.6 GPA, which is bang on the M7 average. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, even if it was a little bit low, because OP is not submitting a GPA on a 4.0 scale, it carries across less to the rankings. Schools don't have to submit it to the Financial Times, for example. So it doesn't do as much damage. And then thirdly, the question about will a 705 completely neutralize it? I think if OP got a 705 and had a 2.1 and graduates with a 2.1, academics are not your issue. Professional is where you need to be focused. I hope that's clear. And we'll talk about what this professional piece looks like. But 2.1, 705, don't worry about academics. Harvard, Stanford, MIT, whatever, you're good.
Okay. Um, and the next question is about the founder bias.
Mm.
Deferred rounds heavily favor traditional elite corporate pipelines, which is MBB and FANG. How do top adcoms value an independent six-figure consulting footprint plus a six-figure standalone IP sale versus a shiny corporate logo?
Yeah. So let me first look. I don't necessarily agree with this assumption of deferred rounds heavily favor traditional elite corporate pipelines. I mean, I'd say they perhaps have a slight advantage over somebody who's worked in corporate but at a non-elite, company, right? The fact that it's a good corporate versus a not good corporate, yeah, they have a bit of an advantage for sure. But OP's not in the corporate realm. OP's on the entrepreneurship track. And so the comparison is slightly different here. How do adcoms value an independent six-figure consulting firm, blah, 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 versus a shiny logo? Look, they need both in the class. They need both in the class for sure. Now, they can get entrepreneurs when they're applying in the full-time application rounds, right? Not necessarily the deferred candidates. I think what OP needs to focus on is what you've done so far does contribute to the class. Be under no illusions. You are in with a shot. But, and this comes back to what I was saying before, it is unclear to me what OP is going to be doing in the next 2 to 3 years. And I definitely think that a mixture of the founder experience and the exit, etc., plus a solid corporate training foundation is the best mix for OP. Again, I don't know what she's doing between now and the MBA, but if it's corporate, it would be better. Why? Because the leadership development programs or the consultancies or the rotation programs at banks give you really good training in the corporate world in a very intense way that somebody who's going into an individual contributor role does not get. So, to be very blunt, if OP gets a shot now at going into a corporate role, it would be best of both worlds. Mm-hmm. If OP applies with a plan to stay in entrepreneurship for the next 3 years, then I don't think that's going to be the best outcome. Mm-hmm. So I know a few different ideas there, but basically, yeah, I hope that's clear.
Okay. And OP's final question, recommendations. I'm planning to use my university's startup incubator director who witnessed my business growth and my engineering thesis supervisor. Should I try to source a traditional corporate reference instead?
The short answer is yes. I like, from there's 2 recommenders there, I like the university startup incubator director. That is it's university still, but it's not academic. It's a bit more real world, and that carries a lot of weight. So I think that recommender can stay. But the thesis supervisor, I would like to replace. Now, traditionally, people use their internship managers here. But if OP can source another traditional corporate reference instead, that would also be very valuable. Now, the one that jumped to my mind was, what about somebody you coordinated with when you sold the business, when you sold the IP of the business? For example, let's say, I don't know the backstory here, but let's say you sold the IP for 6 figures to an established tech company. Presumably you liaised with someone at that tech company, right? Whether it's their lawyer, whether it's their partnerships person, whether it's their M&A team, that person you coordinated with in the sale, in the transaction, that would be a nice recommender, if possible. So in terms of recommendations, you're half there, but I would pivot on that second one. And MBA programs generally do not like in academic recommenders. They also tend to be really difficult. You go to your professor and say, hey, do you want to write me a recommendation? And they've got like 10 million competing demands and loads of other students who want recommendations. They tend to be really difficult. So cross that one off and replace with somebody who was involved in your transaction. I think would be much stronger.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. That's all of OP's questions, Sam.
Cool.
Shall we move on to our third profile for this?
Let's go.
All right. Profile 3, from engineering to M7.
Mm.
OP's applying for next year, and demographic is 25 male, white, Middle Eastern, undergrad, UMD, bachelor's in aerospace engineering with 3.7 GPA. The postgrad is at WashU in engineering management with a 4.0 GPA. GMAT of 725, 4 years of work experience as a propulsion engineer at a major defense contractor, and OP is also a founder of a non-technology company. Work it part-time. Extracurriculars, I did my degree and I worked my company part-time. I don't have much here. Should I do some volunteering or something? I lead the employee engagement team on my program, which is 1,500 employees for 2 years. Target schools include MIT, HBS, Stanford, and Wharton. Currently, my goal is to get into VC or tech management, so whichever schools will help most with that. Backup would be T15. What do you think, Sam?
Yeah, let's go academically first. 3.7 undergrad GPA is very solid versus a 3.6 M7 average. Good start. For a 725. 725 GMAT Folks Edition. I make that out to be 99th percentile. Wow. Right. So academically, we're off to a very, very good start. Professionally, propulsion engineer. Not one we see every day for a major defense contractor. Definitely pre-MBA, like classic, like good pre-MBA experience, but underrepresented in terms of, there's not many propulsion engineers applying to business school.
Yeah.
So excellent from an application perspective. I think we have promotions in here. It's not entirely clear whether, I think within 4 years, OP probably has a promotion or two in there. Unsure. I hope so. If so, that definitely helps. The founder is interesting. This kind of founder of a non-tech company on the side, that's an interesting entrepreneurship, interesting hustle. Interesting kind of distinction there between the sort of the propulsion, which is, you could say, seems very professional, very white collar, versus a non-technology company. I don't know what that means, but it sounds like a car wash or something. That could be, there's a real contrast there, but certainly interesting, and certainly lots of stories in there, I think. Now, the other thing I'd touch on is, so let's come down. Yeah, demographic. Okay, I think slightly overrepresented, white/Middle Eastern, slightly overrepresented, maybe, but not by much. Not by much. Demographic's not really going to be a factor here. I would say, though, in terms of age, that OP already, I think, has, was it 4 years of experience now? Presumably that means 5 years of experience at matriculation, which is the average, and you've already got the GMAT in the bag. OP, unless you've got some massive promotion coming up or something, I don't see any benefit to waiting on the MBA front. I would get on with it. So that's in terms of demographics and sort of age stuff. Extracurriculars. Now, there's this question here about, like, I worked and did my degree part-time, so I don't have much in the way of extracurriculars. That's understandable. And generally speaking, schools, undergrads that are like co-op based, the few others that jump to mind are undergrads like Northeastern in Boston, and also Waterloo in Canada. These are co-op based undergrads where you're working and studying at the same time. Those applicants do tend to punch above their weight in MBA applications. So the fact that you're working and studying definitely looks good. Don't worry about that. This idea of, like, should I do some volunteering or something? Like, you start volunteering now and apply this year, school's going to see right through it. Yeah, you could volunteer now and apply next year and have like a year of experience, but again, I don't think you should be waiting. So I think much better from an extracurricular perspective is to really lean into this employee engagement team, separate that from your day job, make it clear that this is an extra responsibility that you've taken on. It's not your day job. It's not you're not required to do this, and you can get your leadership stories and your community stories from there. So that's how I would recommend. And so, for example, for Booth SA2, Wharton SA2, those kinds of community-focused essays, use the employee engagement team as your community contribution example. Good. Now let's talk about goals then. As it currently stands, my goal is to get into VC or tech management. Again, VC is a crap post-MBA goal. Avoid it. Just don't. Tech management makes a lot more sense. A lot more sense. I like that. I have some specific ideas because I think tech management is quite a broad term. I have some specific ideas later that could narrow that down a little bit. And I would really encourage OP to focus on that for his application goals. Overall, this profile has Harvard, Stanford, Wharton written all over it.
Wow, impressive. Okay. So OP's question was about, I saw something about volunteering there. So OP doesn't have many extracurriculars. So what do you think about that?
I think, as I said, don't start something late because schools are going to see right through it. And we see this often, like people start right before MBA applications, they start doing some, half-assed volunteer work that doesn't really align with their narrative, and it's frankly a waste of time. They're just doing it for the sake of it. I don't like that. I would focus on the employee engagement team, as I said before. How exactly? Well, let's talk about it from a specific essay perspective. So Wharton Essay 2, for example, is how are you going to contribute to our community? And typically the way we structure that essay starts with a story of contributing to my community in the past, written in the first person with an interesting twist to it. I was sitting in the room when we realized that there was an entire demographic in our company that felt completely unseen. So here's what I did to fix it. Those kinds of stories to gain credibility, to show that you're the kind of person that gets involved in your community. Start with that. And then and once you've got credibility, you can use the other half of the essay to say, and so when I'm at Wharton, I'll join the guide program or some other mentorship thing or whatever it may be as in a leadership role. And that then you've got credibility. You've shown that you get engaged in your community generally and have done in the past, and you're going to do so at Wharton as well. And you've given some examples and shown that you've done the research. So that's how I would focus, how I would treat the extracurriculars. Don't start something new now at the last minute. Build up what you've got there in the employee engagement team.
Okay. And what do you think overall, what are OP's chances at their target scores, at his target scores?
Yeah, high.
I
think OP ticks every box, basically, from an academic perspective, professional perspective. Now it's going to be up to OP to go deep and to show the intellectual and emotional maturity that business schools are looking for in leaders. Traditionally, engineers aren't known for this. And often when I'm working with engineer candidates, one of the things that takes a little bit more time than other people is really diving into that introspection piece. And so that is really what OP can do next. That's what OP is going to differentiate his profile.
Yeah. Okay. And is there anything that OP can do at this point to stand out even further?
Yeah, I've touched on these mainly already, but I'm just going to recap them very clearly. First, fix the goals. Avoid venture capital, as we've talked about. It's very nepotistic, etc. You don't want to go there. Tech management makes a lot of sense. I would say typically that would be like a product manager role. It would be a VP of engineering who manages lots of other engineers, maybe a CTO eventually as well. So those are the kinds of tech management roles that OP should be talking about. And then the other thing that OP should be focusing on is the location. People often overlook this. Where are you going to be based? Try and align this with the school, right? If you're applying to MIT, don't tell them that you're going to be based in Silicon Valley, for example. Right? Maybe choose companies in your short-term and role that are already in Boston, so that the school more likely to have placed people there in the past. And if not, at least they can say, well, it's around the corner down the road, so we can easily go and network there. So that's the other factor in terms of the goals, is think about where you're going to be based, and they really want details here. So that's the first thing, fix the goal. 2, frame the extracurricular experience. I'd like to see lots of school research here to see a parallel between the employee engagement team and the schools. Schools will have organizations and clubs and roles and initiatives that are similar to this or have parallels to this. What are they? Is there a student government, for example? And if so, can you apply as an MBA? And if they do, what will you do in that student government that you've already done in your current role? Find those parallels, make them very specific. That's the next thing. That's the second thing that OP can do. Third thing, long-term goal. I don't see any mention of it right now. Maybe the long-term goal could be venture capital. Maybe that would make sense. Or slightly nuanced version of that is angel investing. Angel investing, there's a little bit more mentorship involved. Would also make a nice long-term goal given OP's background. That's 3. And then 4 is the narrative. And I had a bit of a thought about what the narrative could be. So bear with me on this. Right. When I was working, imagine, so this is the career goals essay for, let's say, Harvard SAA, right? Start with, as a propulsion engineer, I worked alongside some, okay, so let's say it's tech management is the goal, right? So as a propulsion engineer, I worked along on this project where I interfaced a lot with a tech team. And I realized that maybe it was a contractor, maybe it was a client, maybe it was another part of the organization. But anyway, I interfaced with a tech team. And I realized that the tech side of our industry is moving far more quickly than where I've been focused up until now. Okay. So my short-term goal is to pivot into technology and specifically technology management in an area that is sort of adjacent to the aeronautical engineering I've been doing so far. So specifically, I'm going to pivot into this aeronautical technology company in a product manager role. My long-term goal is to launch another entrepreneurial venture, this time in the aeronautics sector, for example. To reach these goals, I need an MBA. Now, Harvard don't ask why Harvard, but other schools do. So the natural continuation of this for other schools is I need formal management training. I need a network in the tech space because I don't think the tech exposure is strong yet. So a network in the tech space would be a good reason for an MBA. I need a tech club to meet other entrepreneurs and especially recruiters in the tech industry. And so you've gone all the way from a story through to your goals, through to why you need an MBA, and that is your career essay lined up and ready to go.
Okay. All right. That was very helpful, Sam.
Awesome.
And I think that's also all of the questions I had for you for this profile.
Great. Let's move on to the next one.
Yes, let's do that. All right. Profile review for M7, demographics, male 27, Asian, undergrad, T10 business school with a 3.9 GPA, a GMAT of 705, and work experience as a B4 audit.
Big Four. That's definitely Big Four audit, and I think financial due diligence. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. And the extracurricular is weaker here, worked as a non-profit grant writer for a year. Why MBA? In short, the long-term goal is to be a CFO, would like to pivot to a more strategic consulting role at MBB and then strategic finance, and work my way towards the ultimate goal. Do we think M7 is a stretch? We'll answer that later. What do you think, Sam, overall?
Right, academics, 3.9 GPA, very solid. Very solid indeed. 705 GMAT, very solid as well. So from an academic perspective, yeah, off to a great start. Professional. Now, this is what I would call very hardcore finance training. All right. This is accounting. It's client facing. There's promotions. It's very, very hardcore finance training. And when I meet people who want to pivot into investment banking in particular, into MBB, kind of finance focused roles, the hardcore training is like the key thing that I'm looking for. And OP has it in spades. So that is really nice from a professional perspective. I think there are promotions in there as well because it says till manager. So that suggests there's 2 or 3 promotions up until manager in that role. So that's excellent. Demographic, it sounds to me like OP is overrepresented. I don't know where in Asia, but if that is Indian or Indian heritage, ORM. Extracurriculars. yeah, this grant writer for a non-profit, there's something there. There's a story there. I don't know exactly what it is, but I feel like if you can focus on the impact of those grants, there might be a nice story there. Like I was involved in writing this grant application, and the grant was received, and this is what was done with it. And then, this was the outcome of that. There seems to be like quite an impactful story there, maybe. Not sure. Doesn't sound like OP's backing himself on that one, but I think there might be more than meets the eye. Goals. So, Big Four to MBB management consulting is the goal here, and that is a classic, probably the most common MBA career goal. Now, on the one hand, we know it works. We know it has worked in the past, but this is also putting OP in the most competitive group of candidates. OP is being directly compared to other consultants because pretty much all of the people who say they want to go into consulting are saying MBB. Mm-hmm. OP is going up against all of them, and they tend to be an extremely clever bunch. So I think, like, go for it, but beware that you're going to need to stand out. You're going to need something unique, because otherwise there is a risk you just fall into this quagmire of consulting applicants and you get beaten on stats or something, or you're not memorable. That's my concern, maybe on the goals front, but I think generally a classic story can be done. So overall, strong academically, professionally, maybe a little bit boring. Essays will be crucial.
Okay. And do you think M7 is a stretch for this profile?
I think bottom of M7 is doable. Doable. I would say the Kellogg's and the Booths of the world, maybe Columbia application in there as a reach. Doable. I really do. And I think there's not that many Big Four audit financial due diligence types getting into Harvard and Stanford, to be blunt. Maybe a couple of them into Wharton, but there's really not many. So yeah, I think bottom end of the M7 is where OP should be targeting. I can see Kellogg or Booth with a really good application.
Okay, and is there anything OP can do to improve for these schools or aim
higher? I think the main thing really is distinguishing yourself from the billions of other Big Four consultants, audits, financial due diligence people who've also got great stats. I sound a little bit cynical about this. Let me just kind of show you what that typical application looks like. The financial due diligence type application writes a story or an essay about an implementation or a due diligence. And it's like, oh my God, Lord, give me strength. It's so boring. So that's what they tend to write about. And then they fill it with jargon. They fill it with all sorts of acronyms and bollocks words I don't understand and nobody understands, try and make themselves look clever, fail. And then they over polish it with AI, fail again. And they basically write something as if it's been submitted to a client, and they've completely lost the flair, the swagger that Big Four consulting has beaten out of them. And they just sink. And they don't stand out, and they end up with lackluster results. And then they write on Reddit the next year, I had a 705 and I didn't get admitted to Kellogg. And you see it all the time. So the key is to distinguish yourself, OP, from those people. Now, what do I mean by that? Basically, I want to see exciting human essays. I want to hear you talking about people's feelings, about offense, about conflict. Right? Those are the themes I want to hear about to make your application sound human. I do not want any financial acronyms whatsoever. Good. Now, the other thing that OP can do to, stand out could be to pivot away from the management consulting goals. And I'm not saying don't apply. If you get into business school, don't apply to MBB. You can still do it, but just from a storytelling, from a narrative perspective, there might be something else that stands out more. You could go the IB route, right? The financial due diligence and the audit definitely gives you the credentials to say, I want to pivot into investment banking. At least, I mean, it's still very common, but it's a little bit less common than MBB. That's one angle. Or something just completely unique and a sector that you find interesting. Maybe, for example, when you were grant writing, there was a sector that came up that was really interesting there. I don't know, I'm imagining like habitat conservation, for example, right? Then you write an application that is, I've got really hardcore finance training, really hardcore training from Big Four consulting. And now I want to pivot into a strategy role at a conservation organization, for example. Now that's something they don't see every day. And that's interesting. And when asked why, that's going to have some interesting stories behind it. Just a thought, throwing it out there. And OP, if you'd like to discuss this more, get in touch and we can brainstorm more. But I think that would ultimately lead to better outcomes. And I think that's the kind of approach OP is going to have to take to get those Booth, Kellogg, M7 applications over the line and successful.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Should we move on then to our final profile for the day?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Profile number 5 is an Indian candidate looking to apply in round 1 of Fall 27. Demographic: Indian male, computer science from a liberal arts college with a minor in performing arts, work experience, analytics plus strategy consulting for fintechs. 2 fast-track promotions. Will have 4 years total work experience and matriculation. Have mentored a 3-people team. GRE of 330, well done, OP. GPA of 3.55, a couple of times on the dean's list. Extracurriculars: led several clubs in college as the president. Active musician, recruit at my company currently and manage a few internal initiatives, including the firm's CSR program. LORs from an ex-manager and a skip manager who's an M7 alum. Post-MBA goals: short-term strategy consulting in consumer tech, long-term strategy operator in consumer tech. Schools in mind: HSW, Booth, Kellogg, Darden, Ross, Yale, and Haas. I see questions, but before that, I just want your overall review for the profile.
Yeah. Academics, 3.55 is a smidgen below the 3.6 M7 average. Not bad though. 330 above the M7 average, a smidgen above the M7 average, particularly that quant score is very nice. So academics, solid. Nothing crazy, but solid. Professional. This analytics and strategy consulting for fintechs is interesting. It sounds like, promotions in there as well, so demonstrating really good progress. 3 years now, 4 years at matriculation is slightly below the average for M7s, which is great. Really, really nice. And this mentored a 3-person team shows quite early leadership responsibility as well especially for someone with only 3 years of work experience. It's quite nice. Good. To me, basically, that sounds like a traditional journey, but a very good traditional journey, if that makes sense. So followed the sort of the path that, his dad's probably proud of him. It's followed this very traditional path, but done it extremely well. So great work. Demographic. I do think we have a Indian male engineer consultant analytics is moving away from the pure engineering, but there's definitely a sniff of Indian male engineer here, which is obviously overrepresented. We know that. Extracurriculars. Now, I say this quite often, but I'll say it again. Undergrad clubs don't matter that much because everybody has undergrad clubs. That's what you do during undergrad. Leadership roles as the president, that's kind of slightly higher. The active musician could be interesting if the stories really work, but you're not applying to music school. So on its own, it's not that big a deal. And then managing internal initiatives like the firm's CSR program, that's interesting as well. Depends what manage the initiatives means. Quite a lot of leeway there to use those words in your favor. If you're really managing people on these initiatives and managing a budget, that's a strong extracurricular. Good. Letters of recommendation. Not everybody posts these, but I think OP realizes that this is a small advantage. 2 reasons why OP's LORs are great. 1, there is basically the dream letter of recommendation combo is current manager and current skip manager, which means the manager of your manager. Now, if you can't tell your manager for finance, for it's going to jeopardize your bonus, whatever, the next best option, which is also really strong, is your ex-manager and skip, which is what OP is talking about. So that's awesome on the first thing. The second thing is it's really positive to have a recommendation from somebody who is an M7 alum. Now, ideal if it's from the school you're applying to, but still, Booth understand that a Kellogg recommender or a CBS recommender is still serious, is still a really, overachieving professional. They don't let their kind of niggly competition get in the way of this. They appreciate how valuable that is. And also from the alum's perspective, that recommender knows what business school's about, knows the skills to emphasize, knows the game of being a recommender. In other words, quite generous on the recommendations, on the ratings, etc. So that's a very, very strong pair of recommenders. We like it a lot. Okay, goals. The thing I like about the goals is the narrowness. Strategy consulting, consumer tech, laser focused. I love that. Long-term goal clearly wants to stay in this consumer tech vein. There's a North Star there. There's a really clear narrative taking shape. I love that from a goals perspective. Okay. I think so overall, look, I'm not seeing the Harvard and Stanford flair, the je ne sais quoi, the uniqueness that is often the case, that is often there in those candidates. Something very unusual. Not seeing that here. But OP does tick the boxes solidly. And with a decent application and some good letters of recommendation from those M7 alum, from that M7 alum in particular, I reckon the other schools on that list are well within reach. The Wharton, the Booth, the Kellogg. I don't see CBS in there for some reason. I'd maybe consider throwing it in. Maybe not great fit with MIT in terms of there's nothing particularly kind of techie in there. Yeah, I think basically the schools that OP's focused on are below Harvard and Stanford are really good choices. I think to be more specific, those are OP's reaches, Wharton, Booth, and Kellogg, the M7s, as I said. Kellogg, Darden, Ross, Yale, Haas, those T15, T10 schools, to me, those are scholarship plays here. In this environment, in this job market, having a decent, 6-figure scholarship from one of those schools would be worth considering. So that's how I see those schools on sort of OP's range.
Okay. Right. And OP's first question is, do I need to retake the GRE?
No. Short answer is no. A 330 is already strong. A 330 leaning towards quant with a 169 is even stronger. Your GPA is a little bit on the low side, but it's offset by this really decent GRE score. You're bang on the M7 average overall, I would say. It's time to move on. Get on with your application.
Yeah. Yeah, especially because OP says he doesn't have the time to do this with his job and the B school applications. So, yeah.
Don't. Get on with it.
Yeah. And I know you spoke about the schools a little bit just earlier, but do you want to expand on that? What do you think OP's chances are at those schools?
Yeah, I think not much more to add. I think a very traditional profile, but with very solid stats. Introspection will be the differentiator. I know I say it often, but especially the case for analytics and strategy consultants, not known for being particularly introspective or emotive, etc. Or maybe a bit of storytelling in the role, which will help. But yeah, that the introspection will matter a lot. No, I think maybe I'd probably take out Harvard and Stanford and then crack on with the rest of those applications full steam ahead.
Okay, and anything OP can do in this time to improve?
Yeah, I think maybe the only question is why MBA? I know I said I like the narrowness of these goals, but it does look like OP is sort of already in a strategy consulting role. Okay, wants to pivot from fintech into consumer tech. It's not that big of a pivot. There's perhaps a slight question mark over whether OP needs how much OP needs an MBA. So really make it abundantly clear what it is about the MBA that you need to pivot into consumer tech and to pivot potentially into strategy consulting. Depends on what the actual role is right now. It looks to me like there might be a little bit of a question mark there. Now, that's definitely something you can overcome. You can talk very clearly about the differences, maybe in terms of clients that you're going to be dealing with. Maybe you want to move up to a higher level. There's lots of reasons why you need an MBA to make this pivot, but you need to be aware of them and you need to make them clear. Lay out the exact titles that you're going to be dealing with. So right now, for example, right now I'm an associate. After the MBA, I want to become a senior associate and then an engagement manager or whatever the titles are. That is the sort of detail they're looking for. And that will help you, by the way, lay out. You can use the job descriptions of those different titles to get super clear on how the responsibilities are going to be different. For example, right now, maybe you're an individual contributor. You don't have that much client-facing exposure. In your target role after the MBA, you'll have lots of client-facing exposure, and that'll help you set up certain classes, for example, during the MBA. Maybe some clubs you want to get involved in during the MBA. So that's how to think about it. Now, the other thing here is linked to that is school research will be super important for OP. Really, really important, because as I say, you need to be super specific about what the MBA is going to give you to make this career pivot. And as part of that conversation, it's also what those initiatives look like at the school in question. So, for example, if you're going to pivot into, let's say, like you're going to join the consulting club, would that be in a co-chair role? Does the consulting club at Booth or at Darden even have co-chairs? And if so, how are they split up? Is somebody responsible for events? Like that degree of research where you show exactly the role you're going to take up within the organization at your target school, within the club at your target school. That's the degree of research required. And that's going to be important here to really convince the admissions officer that you've done your research, you know what you like about the school, and that you need an MBA to get there, which, as I say, is potentially a question here.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Okay, that's all of our profiles for today, Sam.
Great stuff.
We do our bonus really quickly.
Let's get stuck in. And now it's been deleted or it's been removed by Reddit's filters. Now, we've faced Reddit's filters in the past. They are notoriously opaque, and we have absolutely no idea why this post would have been removed, because I thought it was a really good post. Why don't you kind of give us an overview of what the post was about? I think the title says it all, right?
Yeah. I have it saved here, so I can just recap it really quickly.
Actually, you know what I'm going to do? This is the original post. I'm going to put it here in this comment box.
Ooh.
And we can, this is what it was before.
Nice. Okay. So OP chose a higher ranked M7 program with a partial scholarship over a full ride at a T25 last cycle. On paper, turning down a full ride looks idiotic. But OP spent weeks staring at spreadsheets, felt really sick to his stomach. What finally helped was stopping the which school is better question and asking which outcome OP could actually live with. So they wanted IB, maybe PE ops. When I looked at employment reports, T25 outcomes were less consistent. Some years they sent people to firms I cared about, other years nobody. And then there was the debt. OP built all these spreadsheets, looked at payments, looked at salary scenarios. It made it feel more real, but less like a giant abstract monster. So OP was throwing everything at the problem at that point: employment reports, LinkedIn stocking, spreadsheets, conversations, career tests. But it forced him or her to admit that a lot of their stress wasn't about debt at all. It was about regret. And then the decision became clear. Visiting the schools sealed it. Hated the isolated college town vibe of the T25, and the M7 felt more like a place where OP would want to spend the next 2 years. They could see themselves getting involved and staying late, meeting people. Maybe they'd regret it, maybe not. But yeah, what's your take on this?
It's an absolutely classic MBA dilemma.
Mm-hmm.
Where to start? Right. The first thing is that this question people tend to lean towards debt.
Yeah.
When they've forgotten what a recession looks like.
Yeah.
And this, I'm going to sound like an old man here, but bear with me. This applicant was probably not around during 2008, or certainly it wasn't working during 2008. Debt can get messy. Debt can get really, really messy. And this, there is definitely something to be said for graduating with very little or less or no debt, just in terms of your health and in terms of your financial security. If we enter a recession in the next couple of years and OP loses his job, that debt is going to be petrifying and potentially bankrupting. So this sort of attitude of debt, I can look past debt, you do see it at tops of cycles. That's one thing I'll say. The other thing is about interest rates. I don't know exactly what interest rate OP got on his debt, but this is another factor that plays a big part. Interest rates over the last few years, especially in the US, have fluctuated wildly. They've risen mainly. They've gone from close to zero up to 5% and on these kinds of student loans more. So the interest rate in question matters as well. And I kind of wish OP had mentioned it here because it would have given us some more context. Taking on debt with a low interest rate is obviously not as big of a issue on a monthly payment basis, etc., as taking on debt with a huge interest rate. So that's the other thing to bear in mind. And we don't have that color. And I want to inject that into this conversation. I'm going to take the other side of this. I'm going to take the other side of this story. I went the other way when I went to do my MBA. I decided to go to Oxford with a scholarship. So Oxford already is a 1-year program. It's substantially cheaper than a 2-year program. It's in the UK, which certainly before and still now is substantially cheaper than the United States. So 1-year program in the UK is cheaper. Add on a decent scholarship, which I managed to get, and basically graduated with zero debt. In fact, I did graduate with zero debt. Now, it did take me, to be fair, a few months after graduation to find a great role that I was really happy with. But, which kind of sucks, right? To be clear, like you graduate from your MBA, all your friends go off and kind of the group scatters. And then I got job hunting because I didn't do much job hunting during the MBA. I decided to focus on enjoying it. And so I was job hunting after the MBA, 3 or 4 months to find a great job. Now, that was already fairly challenging, fairly stressful, and you start to question your worth, etc., all the usual job hunting challenges. But doing that with debt and somebody knocking on the door saying, hey, you owe us this first payment would have been infinitely more difficult. Seriously. Mm-hmm. And so the risk might have been that I'd have got tempted to take on a decent paying job that I didn't really like just to pay back the debt. And guess what? That's exactly where I was before the MBA, in a decent paying job that I didn't really like. So I was back to square one. I would have been back to square one. So for me, the debt was the difference between taking a job afterwards that I enjoy and I liked versus, and a bit of a risk, versus going back into the same thing I was already doing, which I would have hated. Mm-hmm. And that was purely a function of not having any debt. Now, one other thing I want to throw into this is there are other scholarships that you can get. It's not just about the initial scholarship that you get when you join, right? It's very common for someone to get an offer to an M7 with, let's say, 60,000 or 50,000 of scholarship money. We see our clients get that all the time. But that's not the end of it. Because in your second year or coming into your second year, you can apply for more scholarships. And I'm working right now with a client who applied last year with me, who is applying, he's now in his first year, applying to scholarships for his second year. Now, these are of the order of magnitude of 20, 30, 40,000. So all of this to say that, and this kind of goes against my other advice, but is that just because you get in with no scholarship or a little scholarship doesn't mean you're necessarily going to end with no scholarship. You could get one in your second year or during the program. You can also use your internship salary to pay down some of the MBA debt, etc. So that's the other hand. Overall, it comes down to people's character, I think. I've seen people take on $250,000 of debt for an MBA without blinking an eyelid. Other people much more worried about that, and it comes down to character. And that's something that each to their own. I was on the low debt side.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay, I think that's quite an insightful conversation. Very interesting comments in there as well.
Let's have a look. What are people saying? Let's clear that. Right. Paid sticker price, 4 years, didn't regret it. If you'd done this within the last 4 years, assuming you fixed your interest rate at the start, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That means got in with a cheap, low rate of interest, hasn't had a recession during this period. Brilliant. If the interest rate was higher or there was a recession, that might look different. Conserve and utilize your energy to accomplish your goals. Okay. Thanks, ChatGPT. Turned down 2 full rides for 0 at an M7. Ran the numbers, and once I knew I could afford it with reasonable debt being the key thing here, maybe a small scholarship, maybe a low interest rate. The M-dashes are my own, not AI.
You have to clarify
that upvote. I love that. Good. It looks like, ended up getting into IB.
Zero regrets. I see a lot of zero regrets
Yeah.
in that.
Now, maybe there's an element here of self-defeatingness. Okay, so here's a great example of the opposite. Went to school for free with a full scholarship. Went to MBB. Used the savings to buy a house. There you go. That's the difference. We're talking about a house. So you can have, you could argue that ending up in MBB with it's probably a $200,000 salary now, with a house paid by the scholarship. That's a strong outcome. Very strong outcome. So horses for courses, I think, as my grandma would say.
All right. Okay. I
Brilliant
think that's
stuff.
all of our profiles and our bonus for today, Sam.
Excellent. Well, look, if you've enjoyed this roast today, feel free to get in touch. We are currently very, very nearly full for round 1. Might be able to squeeze in 2 more clients, but get in touch if you are looking to apply in round 1. If you'd like your profile evaluated, send us over the information. I believe in the comments of this video, there is the handle, my handle on Reddit, and you can go via the website as well, which is samweeks.com. Looking forward to our next roast, Mal. I will see you next week.
All right. See you next week.
See ya.